Hey everyone, my name is Gabrielle Blackwell, or I go by GB. I am a BDR manager at Airtable. I've been managing BDR teams since 2017, so been here for a hot minute. I started off as a BDR. I've held roles as an AE as well as sales enablement manager. So yeah, really excited about today's conversation, but I'll punt it on over to Mary to introduce herself.
Hey there, I am Mary Foster, VP of Demand Gen at Ambition. So, really, that encompasses everything we do to drive pipeline, including the SDR function. I know some people are BDR, XDR, whatever. We have sales development at Ambition, lovingly referred to as Team Pipeline. Best team in the whole company, probably, if I'm being honest. Been at Ambition since early 2019 and long time in B2B SaaS. So excited to be here to talk about measurable sales management and surviving sales development management and all the things with y'all.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm so excited for this conversation. And before we get started, will y'all put a 1 in the chat if you are a BDR leader or a sales leader, or you're like involved in leadership of any kind?
Oh, let's go.
Go. All right, cool. Can y'all put a 3? Let's pay attention. Can y'all put a 3 in the chat if you are an individual contributor but are interested in leadership? All right, we're seeing some 3s. We're seeing some 3s. Okay, y'all. The next question the next question I have for y'all is okay, give us a 7. Give us a 7 if anyone has ever taught you exactly what to do as a leader or as a manager. Like if you've ever been given a guide of here's what you absolutely have to do no matter what to be successful. Oh, I'm seeing some 7s. I was highly expecting not to see that many people have 7s. So like y'all are lucky. I'm going to tell you that real quick. So the reason the reason why I even asked this question is it gets into like how we even got to this webinar to begin with. A few months ago or a couple months ago, I was sitting at my desk and I was having a conversation. I think I was having a conversation with one of my coworkers, and they were just asking questions. They're like, "Hey, like I just started as a manager at Airtable, and I'm really trying to understand how I can be the best manager ever. How do you go about like your day to day?" And so I have documented things over the past like year or so. Really like breaking out like what does it take for me to be really good as a manager, and how I even started this journey of documenting things first and foremost was very honestly, I was working for someone who was trying to get me fired like for about the 6 months, and the language that I would always hear from him was like you don't know how to manage, or you're not meeting expectations. And every time that I would say like, hey, what are those expectations that you have of me? I wouldn't really get an answer. So when I would go and do skip levels with the second line leader that I reported into, I would say the same thing of like, hey, how do I make sure that I'm meeting expectations? I still wouldn't get an answer. And so I just wrote down everything. I was like, okay, what does it take for me to hit, what does it take for my team to hit 100%? How does that back into the activities that I'm doing? What are the things that I need to be managing? Where do I need to be leading? What does this mean for enablement and team training? And so I just created document after document. And I'd been sitting on it for a little while, and it came time where I had just shared it out with like 5, 6, 10, 15, 20 friends. And I'm like, oh, I'm gonna post this thing on Gumroad. And that's where the SDR Manager Survival Guide was born. So I'll put a link later on as to like where you can find it and whatnot. But today's conversation is really like I just feel like I'm not the only person who had that experience of maybe flailing in a management experience. I'm probably not the only person who like has ever felt like I don't really know what I'm doing when I'm transitioning into leadership and management. So we've got Mary and myself, and we're going to really kind of dig into what are some of the foundational elements of SDR leadership. What are things that we can be talking about to get better? And then also like, what are some other paths, or what's the next thing after management too that we can talk about? So if you have questions that are already on your minds, like feel free to put those in the Q&A, put that in the chat, as Savannah said. But otherwise, let's get into it. I'm going to have to take a drink of water, so I'm excited that I get to ask you a question first. So, Mary, yes, I guess like the first thing I have to ask is you're somebody who has BDR managers, SDR managers rolling up into you. Like, how are you? Like, what are the expectations that you are setting with your XDR managers and leadership team?
Yeah, I think your story is not super unique, GB, in that you were probably a super high performer, stellar results as an individual contributor, promoted into management, and it's a totally different job. Like if you are doing it correctly as a leader and a manager, there's so much more to it than chasing fires, helping people close deals, making sure we hit targets. Like there's actually a core group of responsibilities. And if you're doing kind of all of them, really only 20% of your time is dedicated to like accountability of the activity metrics, kind of. So breaking it out into functions of responsibility for the management, it is accountability to the activities. Are people hitting their dials? Connects, is your ratio of connect to meeting set right? Like there's definitely things there, but there's also leadership and motivation. Are you inspiring your team to be intrinsically motivated? Are you earning discretionary effort from your reps? Are they bought into the company mission? There's coaching, and I think a lot of people think that that's just one-on-ones or just call coaching. But if you are scaling coaching appropriately, it's like facilitating peer-to-peer coaching, creating subject matter experts on your team to help group share, team coaching. And then hiring and recruiting is a big part of it. Like SOS, as if that wasn't enough, then you also have to like build your bench, right? Because if you're doing a great job and motivating people and they're high performing, then they're going to constantly be promoted up and you're going to need a bench to pull from. So you're also recruiting. And then there's like a development, employee development or mentorship or helping people to professionally advance. Like great leaders, great managers also are responsible for that. So that's a lot. And if you switch from, reactive to fires all the time and become a proactive manager, then you can really orchestrate a coaching program that encompasses all of those things. But that's sort of how we think about the core responsibilities.
Ooh, I love that. Only because this is a conversation that I had yesterday, teaching a class, and we were teaching folks who are aspiring to be SDR leaders or have just stepped into the role too. It's like, all right, cool. We've got these 5 areas of responsibility across like accountability activities, leadership motivation, coaching, hiring, recruiting, as well as development and mentorship. Like, are there specific areas that you feel like BDR managers, SDR managers miss the mark on when they first come into the position?
I think that's a great question. I think coaching can be a term that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so that's something that I think you have to get really clear on. Because like I said, sometimes for people like not necessarily in sales development, but more in inside sales, like it is like just pipeline reviews. You're just doing pipeline reviews. What are your deals this week? Who do we need to get an executive sponsor on? But for us, coaching is really, it is one-on-ones. And that is like a manager and employee responsibility shared. We'll talk about that a little bit later. It is also call coaching, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those are all in the same program, right? So for us, call coaching sometimes takes shape in what we call call camp. And so peers will submit, we have themes like, all right, when you handle the objection, I'm not the right person. Everybody submit a call. And then we all listen together in camp and we vote on a winner. And it is peer-to-peer coaching. And that helps scale the manager time because sometimes they come in and tee up the session and then they're out to do something else. Maybe they do have an interview or something like that. So I think the word coaching can just be really confusing. And so I think it is one-on-ones, it is group coaching, it is peer coaching, it is team coaching. It encompasses a lot of things, and that's just important, I think, to set that expectation.
Ooh, I love that. One thing that I was thinking about just in terms of the like coaching aspect, how we can do it and whatnot, and hopefully it's okay if I can like share some things that I've like written down, and this is maybe like a highlight of the SDR like manager survival guide a little bit. One of the things where I'm clicking around in Zoom, like I hope I know how to share a screen, but one thing that I did, I was talking about these expectations that I had of for myself when I was managing. Like one of the big things that I went through, everything really led up to coaching, right? Like I was like, all right, the biggest, like my number one job is to get my team, like everyone on my team to a level of like acceptable performance, right? Where like 100%, I just what I tell my team, like 100% is the minimum of the job, right? So like everybody has the opportunity to hit 100%. And then that's the first job that I have. And the second thing is to get them promoted, right? So I'm like, if I'm doing those two things at like kind of at a high level, I could do a pretty good job. Like those are the core things. So then in terms of like, how do I map this out for my day? And this is not something that has to be 100% adhered to, but this is what I had created for myself a couple of years ago. or last year, I should say, is like what was super helpful for me was like making sure that I understood from a high level, like what's going on in my reps book of business, in terms of the numbers review. And so this is goes to like Mary's point of like accountability, reporting. Are people hitting the right activities? Do they have the right conversion rates? And if they don't, like this is probably the first place that I'm going to go in and figure out like what's going on here. But I'm making a hypothesis more than anything else. And then I'm going into my one-on-ones and figuring out like, hey, like, so say Mary's on my team. Hey, Mary, here are some things that I'm seeing in the like numbers wise, like themes and trends, or if I've already empowered my team to be able to do all of this, like I'm saying, hey, let's go through your numbers. What are some things that you see that are standing out to you? Like, what are some things that are going really well? What's maybe something that might be holding you back? And we'll actually have a conversation to go like, what might be going on here? Like, let's come up with an assumption. Let's come up with a hypothesis of what's the one thing that we can then go and focus on to impact your numbers, whether it's so that you can pace ahead, if you can get better, if you can develop in one specific skill. And then, so that's what we do in the first one-on-one. And then the second one-on-one of the week, like a Wednesday or Thursday, we're focusing in on that one thing, 30 minutes. So like, this is like one-on-one time. We can also reinforce in those team trainings and whatnot if that's something that's impacting everyone else too. But like this is really where I find myself being able to have like the biggest impact with my coaching time. But a lot of it first and foremost has to deal with like, let me make sure I know my numbers, my team's numbers, and let me make sure that my reps know their numbers too.
Yeah. That's pretty interesting. Let me ask a couple questions about what you shared. So how do y'all set your targets? How do you know it's 40 dials? How do you know it's X number of emails? Are you tracking the efficiency across what it takes to actually get to pipeline? I think that's a question people a lot of times don't know the answer to, or like, are all things created equal? So for us, we use a weighting system too. So it is like calls, emails, but things are weighted heavier. We're actually like a phone driven org. Most of our meetings come from cold callings. And so that in your scorecard is going to be weighted more heavily. So curious how you think about those activity metrics.
Okay. I'm the worst. Like I'm like a second line leader's worst nightmare of a manager when it comes to activities. I'm going to be honest with you. And it's not for nothing, right? Here's the first thought that I have is, well, one, there's the spreadsheet example that we'll have of, okay, we need to get X amount of pipeline and like, let's actually back this into numbers. So, okay, if BDRs are responsible for generating opportunities, okay, well, how many meetings do they need to set, or how many meetings need to be completed to get one op? How many meetings need to be booked to get to meetings held? And then how many conversations do you need to have in order to get that? And you can break that out by channel, like calls, email, social, video, gifting. And then it's like, all right, well, now what does this mean from daily activity? So I think that's how I'll go about actually setting that's how I go about setting the KPIs. There's other things that you can look at as well, such as like one thing that's important, and I'm still trying to figure out the correlation between this for the company that I'm at right now, is like, how many prospects do we need to be adding into sequence on a weekly basis to make sure that because like for BDRs and SDRs, our pipeline is people. So like, I was like, all right, we'll also back that in. And in companies that I've been at where it's much more like a transactional motion, or we're going after commercial SMB companies, I actually looked at the number of accounts that we were working on a monthly basis and making sure that reps were tracking on a weekly basis of like, all right, are you actually adding enough accounts and people into your sequences and into your workflows? So like, but those would be the big ones as far as how I'm thinking about setting KPIs. Now, this is what makes me second line leaders potentially worst nightmare, plus and potentially their best friend. You know, like it's a love hate relationship. Is I do have reps. I have seen it where reps are able to find their ways of being successful that don't require adhering to every single one of those KPIs. But that being said, like we just have to know our numbers and know like where we're pacing, where we're tracking, and have a plan to adhere to those to the end results. If I have some reps who like are not hitting any activities and not getting any results, like that's a different conversation. But for reps who are hitting their numbers, I do give them a little bit, I give them much more like autonomy as to like how they actually hit those results if they've proven they've been able to do it time and time again.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's where peer-to-peer coaching comes in too, because if someone is doing something wildly successful that is not showing up in an activity scorecard, it should probably be in the activity scorecard. So an example for a lot of people is social selling. Some people have a lot more success on LinkedIn than others, but it's like, okay, let's unpack what is making them so successful. What are they doing? What is the pattern interrupt to get someone to even respond to your LinkedIn cold message or things like that? So I do mostly agree with that.
Okay.
Only difference is, I would say, if something is wildly successful for one person, it should be shared across the team. And can we all learn some successes from that? One other thing that you kind of shared a little bit that I thought was interesting around metrics, when we think about goal attainment or quota attainment or team attainment, for the manager, for managing like how GB is doing as a manager versus how your counterpart is doing as a manager, I like to not just look at total team attainment, but percent of reps to attainment, because you might have a couple of A plus over producers that get you to goal, right? Like you might be trending to 100% to team goal for meetings or whatever it is, but what percentage of reps are actually to quota? Is it just a couple of all-stars and then everyone else is struggling? And so that is a metric that we would use to, when we scorecard out managers, like if you had an objective scorecard, it would be, hey, not just total attainment, but percent of reps there, which I think is interesting. One question that came through the chat from Matt was, how many accounts should reps work per week, and how do you go about figuring out that metric? I'm assuming, Matt, that you run an account-based model is kind of maybe why you're asking that. We do similar ratios at the account level. So what is our, because some things are in enterprise versus velocity or whatever, we sometimes will multi-thread or set multiple opportunities. Obviously, it's different for everyone, but it's a very similar formula of like, how many logos are you looking to close? And then you walk it backwards that way. So on average, our reps needed about 200 accounts, I think, per quarter when we were doing it. We've switched to now like in a real-time intent-based model. So reps are constantly getting new accounts, so we don't manage it the same way anymore. But it's a very similar motion of like, how many accounts were they working? What percent of your accounts were you getting meetings with? Not just contacts, because you might be working multiple contacts, but what percent of accounts are you getting meetings with? And how many meetings at those logos go on down? So it's very similar. Okay.
Right. I've got, I can share something that I've used to figure some of this stuff out, like thinking about, all right, if it's for like SDRs and BDRs, like how many accounts do they need to be working? And I will say like this metric, I'm using this now and we're going after strategic accounts. It tells me nothing. Like that metric means absolutely nothing to me right now. But when my reps were working accounts where maybe the deal cycle was like 45 to 90 days, like it made a lot more sense, and we can just like take action on it way better. Something that I did to help myself out was, and this is probably like not the most like beautiful thing in the world, but it helped me figure it out. Like I would actually just take every single one of my reps and I'd look at what are the KPIs that I care the most about, from like calls to convos, the conversion rates that are there as well. And I also looked at accounts. So I would just map it out and go, okay, like I've got some, if I just wanted to look at accounts worked, and then look at like account to op created. And then I would start to figure out like, are there any themes and trends based off of who's performing well? So I'm not necessarily looking for somebody who's like setting the trend, but I'm like, all right, if I've got some people who are on average hitting like, they're pacing towards 100%, or they're a consistent performer all the time, like what are the commonalities that are here? And so like for this example, I was like this is a little bit different, but like at one point in time, I saw that the reps on my team who are hitting their number consistently always had like 80 to 100 accounts in flight. Like they were actively working 80 accounts. So one thing you can just go and do is look at, all right, how many accounts are people working, or wow, words today. How many accounts are people working? What's the conversion rate to op created? And then work backwards, and then specifically look at the people who are already hitting their quota. Like what are the themes and trends that you're seeing there?
One thing I think that's really interesting too is, the account worked to meeting set number and then the time frame there, because when we switch to an intent-based model where it's not just your ICP, but we call it in-market ICP, if people are showing intent on G2 or on your website, we round robin the account in real time. And so that's hard for me to remember how many accounts the reps have at any given time because you get new accounts every day almost. And so we really do monitor contacts sequenced also because we want to make sure that you get number of contacts per account working immediately. And that's different for the market segment too. So for enterprise, it's usually more than, let's say, like a emerging SMB where you may have a smaller sales org. And the titles are different for us too that way. So in enterprise, we tend to go high for us, and it's different for everyone who you're selling to, but we say director and above, and we look for VPs, and we look for sales enablement, and sometimes RevOps. And in velocity, we can sometimes go low into sales management titles where they have more buying power, more pain, things like that. So we do segment out a lot based on market segment. But I think it's important to measure both, not just like opportunity to closed won, but account to closed won, because sometimes that ratio looks bad when I think it was Alejandro put in the chat something about enterprise. We are setting 4 ops per logo in enterprise. Like we look to get into sales enablement, sales development, sales ops, sales management. And then whatever the way we do it is like there will be usually one opportunity that converts into pipeline, and then we go multi-thread from there. So it's off of the one op. So if you're just looking at opportunity to closed one, your ratio can look bad. You really want to look at logo to closed one when you're doing a model like that where you're multi-threading depending on how you do it in Salesforce. So I think both of the metrics are important. Obviously, that's a deviation from what we came here to talk about, but I think it's interesting because I think a lot of people are curious for strategy, especially with account-based. It's sort of newer.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important point. I mean, I don't know, Savannah, maybe we should have another webinar, just like metric sales dev, depending on the segment, because like I've worked like it's organizations where it's more like mid-market focused to company where like our segment was commercial SMB, and now in like strategic where we're going after companies that have like, you know, like 50,000 employees or more. If you use the exact same metric model for every single one of them, like we miss a lot of opportunities to figure out what's actually going to drive business forward. So great point. I took notes. Thank you, Mary. Yes. All right. Perfect. So I think, did we have any other questions in the chat before I go back to the questions that we have? And if not, no worries.
I think people are really curious about ratio metrics, which is great. I will try to share some stuff in here too, but I didn't see anything super specific we haven't answered.
Yeah. All right. Perfect. So the next thing, like if it's okay, like maybe can we go to one-on-ones? Who owns it? And there's going to be 2 parts to this question. First one is, you know, manager to their rep. I'm also curious to hear from you, Mary, about manager to their manager. So, but let's start off. But yeah, like one of the most frequent questions I get asked by folks, like peers of mine, is like, and reps as well, is like, who owns one-on-ones, managers or reps?
And I'm assuming the question own is like, who should be driving it? Who is it meant for? You know, things like that. So let's see if we can get people to answer the poll. Who's guiding the conversation? Ooh, I'm about to come in with a hot take.
Do we have I think we have the same take.
Just according to the poll. According to the poll, I'm gonna have a hot take right here.
All right, cool. What's your hot take?
Okay. So I think to answer the question specifically, who is guiding the conversation, that is the responsibility of the manager. If you have a successful coaching framework and you are asking observation, application, and reflection questions that are designed for performance improvement, and you know how to draw out of the rep self-assessment and self-performance evaluations and things like that, that's the responsibility of the manager. It is not just coming to shoot the shit, even if the person feels good when you leave. That is not what it's for. It is for performance improvement, employee development, mentorship, a lot of things. So I think the manager is tasked with guiding the conversation. The way we do it at Ambition anyway is we use our own software. So you can do this without a software. I'm not pitching, but we use our own software. And what happens is we have different types of programs and templates that go out ahead of the one-on-one. And it is the manager asking very specific things, and the rep is answering ahead of time. The manager gets all of their reps one-on-one check-ins, what we call them, back, and they can be prepared to talk through things or comment ahead of time. So it's everything from like attaching calls. It pulls in like automatically pipeline, and then there's developmental questions throughout there too. So the manager is driving the conversation for the benefit of the rep. The rep is the one who should benefit from the one-on-one. And so the way you can kind of measure, I'll put in the chat something like, we talk about measuring a lot and talk about measuring reps a lot, but you should be measuring your managers too. And so the way you can measure if your managers are good at coaching, there's definitely KPIs to track. So we talked about a little bit about percent of reps to quota, not just team, the number of coaching activities your managers are completing. Pipeline across stages can tell if your managers know how to execute proficiently on like an established sales process with your reps and teach them to run the sales process. And then there's also like qualitative feedback of like surveys there. So I firmly believe benefit should be the rep, and the responsibility to guide the conversation is the manager. And you should probably develop internal coaching frameworks to make it consistent across your org.
Oh, sorry, I muted myself because I was having reactions over here where I'm like, this is phenomenal. Yeah, I was like, your hot take's my hot take. This for BDRs and SDRs specifically, I think when I initially started, people would tell me it's on the rep to guide the conversation. And I was like, okay, well, for some folks, they're going to be very, very organized, very, very forward driving. Like they're kind of like coaching me on how to do things. But for folks who who aren't doing that or don't know how to do it, like we're kind of just having the same conversation over and over again. And at that point in time, like, again, like when I said the two key pieces of my job of like making sure that everyone is performing and getting promoted, or AKA like they're developing, right? They're getting better at their job, and they're getting better at potentially the next job they're going to be at. If we're not like, if we're just shooting the crap, right? I'm only doing really like 50% of my job. And so like I will definitely like set an agenda, and then I'll always come in prepared of like, all right, hey, here's going to be our agenda to set in. And if I'm like, but I'll also start off and say like, hey, here's my agenda for what we need, like what I believe we need to cover. Is there like, what is it that you would also like to make sure that we adhere to, or that we actually like talk about today too? So I'll be like somewhat flexible depending on who the person is, where they're at performance wise and also development wise. I think always coming in ready to like have a plan to drive the conversation forward has been a game changer. Also, radical candor should.
Yeah, GB, I see a question in the chat that I'm curious what you would say. So Ann Morgan says that I believe the BDR should be motivated to be self-accountable for how they evaluate themselves. I'm curious your take on that.
So the question, okay, was this a Q&A question, or I was trying to find the question itself?
It's in the chat. It's in the chat.
Okay. Okay. So I think the BDR, so there's if anyone's heard of like the situational leader or situational leadership by Dr. Paul Hersey, put a 1 in the chat. Okay. So the situational leader like ship model, to me, let me know about where people could be starting off from. There are, and what kind of leadership approach you should take with it. And I'm sure everyone, like most people probably heard about like directive leadership to coaching leadership. And so directive is more so like, do this here. You're very much like holding their hand and going it through it. And then the coaching is more so like you're asking someone questions. We have to recognize where people are in their development journey. And that to me is what is super duper helpful. Now, within the situational leadership as well, what it talks about is, let's say that you have someone who's not performing. There could be many reasons why. It could be one, they don't know what they're doing and no one ever told them how. Our job then is to set expectations, right? And show them the way. There are some people who just don't want to do it because they're insubordinate, right? Like that's something different. Then there are some people where they know how to do the job, but they need to be validated. They're like, and I don't mean insecure like in their character. They're just like, they just haven't actually done this process enough. And I think that is the majority of the people that we're going to be managing. is they're going to fall into that phase, into that stage of they need a lot of validation. And so there's going to be a lot more of like, all right, I'm going to take a directive approach until they get to that next stage of like, all right, I'm feeling pretty good about what I'm doing. I might ask them some questions. I might ask them to show me how, and then I'm providing feedback. Then they're going to get to a level where they're going to show me and I'm going to learn from them. So in terms of like a BDR should fill in the blank, I cut that from my language altogether. And I'm just like, I'm just going to go like, where is this person in their developmental stage? If I need to be directive, I will be directive. I don't want them to stay there. And then I'll move them forward. I won't necessarily make it about motivations. I'll just make it about like, where are they developmentally? And like, let me address them where they're at and then move them to the next level.
I think that's great. And so part of what we were going to talk about today, was what are the key components of building a culture of high performance? And I think that's exactly one of them, which is for us, it's accountability, encouragement, coaching, and recognition and amplification, because GB just hit on it. If some people need to be validated, some people need, more directive developmental, depending on where they are in their curve. I do think it is the sales manager's job to create people who are intrinsically motivated. You can also hire for that. But to Ann Morgan's point, I don't know if this was a person you hired or you inherited or how it works, but I think you can start to hire for people who are intrinsically motivated, but it is still the manager's job to earn that discretionary effort. So people can put in a letter of effort or, the level of effort. You've heard of quiet quitting. Everyone's hearing about quiet quitting right now. Like, I made my 50 dials and now I'm going home or whatever. It's the manager's job to inspire, motivate, to earn discretionary effort. And so that can look like a lot of different programs to get there. We do a combination of like, we have gamification, we do leaderboards, we do Slack triggers to celebrate. We celebrate everything. So not just like the ultimate deal signatures, but hey, you made 50 dials, standing ovation in the Slack channel. We celebrate effort and outcomes. And I think that that's important. We talk a lot about tools though, and there's a great Q&A in here from Jason who says, he inherited a team of 2 reps who are older, don't know how to use sales tech tools, never done outbound and only inbound. What would you recommend for first steps in training and coaching? From the manager perspective, you take it first, GB.
Yeah, I was so there's a framework that we use at Airtable. I just like using the language to keep it simple, but it's tell, observe, and then like provide feedback. So like you tell people how to do the job or you show people how to do the job. You then observe them doing the job and then you give them feedback on it. And then you keep on like kind of ripping through that. Something that I think is really helpful is like, first and foremost, like map out kind of like what does good look like? And in +1 if you can record it, right? And have that or figure out like what's the learning style of these folks? Is it a video? Is it side-by-side coaching or otherwise produce like multiple formats of the content? But I always like give people an example of like, hey, here's what good looks like using this process. Now I want you to do it and then sit next to them and provide feedback, right? And then get to a point in time where it's like, all right, we're going to keep on doing this. We're going to keep on doing it, right? Like until both you and I feel good, right? And then we'll move on to the next thing. One thing like a couple weeks ago, so we hire a bunch of new folks and some of this it's not even generational. Like I have people who are like my age, I have people who are younger than me, I got folks who are just coming out of college. And the thing is like people are coming from all different kinds of places. And the way that we set up our tool stack can differ from one place to the next. Like I've seen so many iterations of Salesforce, my brain hurts. So like really pointing people to as well, like what are the key things that you need to know right this very second? Like in the next 3 weeks, you really only need to know these 3 workflows. So that's the only thing that we're going to focus on. Then after those 3 weeks, like here's the next flow of workflows that we're going to go after. And again, I have everything recorded and I also show the workflows in the context of their job. So for example, I created a document where I'm like, all right, we need to process inbound leads. We need to process outbound. We need to go and understand where are our accounts. How do we find our leads? How do we create leads? And so within the context of their job, I've created videos and it shows them as well, like, here's how you use the tool sets to support that workflow. So it's not just a workflow in a silo, but it's workflow in the context of their job. So like One, document the process, show them what good looks like, sit and, show them, and then have them show it to you, provide feedback, like shadow. And then the third piece is also like making sure that you're teaching the workflows within the tech stack, within the context of their job.
GB, you might have a future in sales enablement. That's all I'm saying.
I used to manage sales enablement.
There was a really good question in the chat around what question do you recommend asking and hiring to find people who are intrinsically motivated, which made me think of a couple of things I'm going to drop here, which is one, we have a gallery of sales coaching templates and you can see what everyone asks in their one-on-ones and why. So I'm just dropping it in the chat. But some questions I ask around finding intrinsic motivation are actually around people's failures and how they think about failures and why they considered it a failure. So like, tell me the last time something was really hard or you didn't get the outcome that you wanted. What'd you do? Why do you think it happened that way? And hear people's process thought of like, well, someone else was disappointed in me versus like I was determined to like overcome in this way, or like I don't look at it as like quitting. It's like a modification or it's like a time frame thing. It's a great question. I don't have a perfect answer, a perfect science answer, but I do ask about things outside of work and particularly around challenges, failures, perceived failures, things like that, because I just want to hear how people think about them. Like I am a person who I would consider pretty intrinsically motivated for in a lot of different ways. And it's usually very less about what my performance review comes back as and more how I perceive my performance. I think that can be like some people's nightmare. I'm like, I care less about what y'all put in my document and more about how I feel about my performance, which is great and also challenging.
Yeah.
Unrelated hot question in the chat. Bad info or is anyone running into bad data with Zoom info?
Shoot, I've been bad data all my life.
Yeah, I don't want to be a hater, but I think it's all day, every day. I don't know.
Yeah. I've got some hacks for Zoom info, by the way, if you really want to know some stuff. So and I do want to, I would like to have a crack at the answer for the motivation one, but for the Zoom info real quick is, just note that like with some of these like contact database folks, like the way that they'll acquire the numbers is they'll actually have like agents call into the company and find the information like manually. So all that means is like if you have like, let's say if you look at your prospects and you see that there are people who've only been at their new company for like, I don't know, less than a year, go look up in Zoom info their previous company and go see if you can find their name at the previous company. It probably has their direct information there. So like that's a nice little hack, right? It's just go look at their previous employer and see if you can find their previous contact their contact data from their previous employer. Probably find the information there.
And you know what metric we track to see how like we feel about our data is calls to connect. Sometime when your connect rate is going down. So like tracking everything and knowing exactly what you would do about it and why. When we get into like maybe we'll touch on some data stuff, but that is exactly one of like, what is our call to connect rate? Has it dropped? Is something causing that? Do we need to use like different phone number tactics or whatever? Is it our data? Something like that. So you can identify trends across the board more than just feeling it feels bad, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I'd also like go in and this is something that was a topic of conversation like this week, especially. So like we use Orem, or we have Orem available to us. And so like we did like an on-site day with one of the CSMs and people were saying, okay, like Zoom info data, it's crap, right? But when we actually went through the process, it was a little bit manual, like one by one. We did find a lot of direct info, like a lot of direct and mobile data on there. When reps were previously saying like, hey, we can't find good data. We can't find good data. So sometimes like also like inspecting reps work of like, actually show me how you're finding the information. And if you can go like, it's not to say like, oh, you're wrong, but you just want to make sure that people actually know how to use the technology appropriately. It could be a good opportunity to help people out when they need it. But I had just one thought because there's a book that got recommended to me for the interview piece. So Never Hire a Bad Salesperson Again was one book that was recommended to me last year. So like Kevin Dorsey, super cool guy. I somehow snatched him as a mentor of mine like about a year or so ago. And I was like, yo, Katie, you like one, he studies sales all day long and like psychology and stuff like that. I was like, I keep on getting I'm like, I consistently get feedback about the candidates that I'm pushing through that they're not driven and like they're not motivated. Like someone somewhere, right, in leadership is saying that these aren't the right candidates. How can I make sure that I'm going after that I'm putting forth the right people and that I'm asking the right questions to get to that? And so what I appreciated about this book that you recommended was it breaks down like motivation or drive into like three main things. There's the need to achieve, there's they take thrill in competition, and thirdly is like they're optimistic. And what this means to me is like for need to achieve, it's hey, like do they have a track record of achievement? And it could be in work, it could be in school, it can be in sports, it could be in volunteer services, but like you can just see that like time after time, like they're somebody who wants to achieve and doesn't really matter the arena that they're in. Like they've just proven that, right? Like so that's like one area. For like an internships, a lot of internships, like they'll do gamification between the interns, right? So like who's the one who's like, oh, I want to do that. I think that goes into like the thrill of competition. And like it's not to say that people have to be cutthroat, but it's like, hey, like tell me about a time that you had a challenge. And I think to Mary's point, like when did you fail? And then how did you show up the next time? Right? Like I don't want to just know that you failed and you said, oh, I failed, damn it. Right? Like I want to know like I failed and I said, I can do better than that. And you came back and you did better than that. And then for the optimism, like this to me is where it's not just optimistic of like, oh, everything's going to be great, but it's really like a deep-seated belief in their ability to do a great job. So like and everything kind of like flows into each other. So if they're like, cool, like I have this need to achieve, I didn't achieve there, I didn't stop, like I'm going to take this on as a competition for myself, right? And I believe in my ability to meet, if not exceed, the challenge. And so like I would shape all my questions to try and get to that kind of thing. Also, a second thing that Katie recommended for me was like, and ask people for 3 examples. So like, listen, we're interviewing, we're salespeople, right? We're going to schmooze, right? We're going to sell. So like, and people usually like they usually prepare one response for a question. So people are going to be prepared with that. So like when I started asking people for, hey, like if someone said, hey, I'm money motivated, and I would go, okay, cool. Tell me about a time that you changed your behaviors or your action. Yeah, you changed your behaviors or changed your way that you thought about things to get more money. And if they couldn't give me 3 examples, I didn't believe them. And then I go, cool, like now that we know that that's probably not what you're really motivated by, tell me about a time where you changed your actions or you changed your mindset for something. And like now let's actually have a motivation conversation. So I've done that for candidates. I've also done that for people on my team to make sure that like I'm meeting them with the appropriate kind of like energy to get that discretionary effort.
That is so smart, GB. I love that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, I know we've got like 15 minutes, so be sure to put in your questions, right? So that we're not missing anything. And then Mary, there was something you mentioned that you wanted to dig a little bit more into. Was it metrics?
It was around, yeah. So we had talked about like the data practice behind running sales or sales development. And I think there's a lot of things people can track, and it is like the paralysis by analysis thing, kind of. But for me, I do have a list of metrics, and I'll share some other ones too. So here's a couple of things. I'm going to drop this blog post is how you measure sales managers. Like KPIs were how you can actually measure sales managers. And we also have like a scorecard framework because, reps have scorecards. We have a scorecard framework for how you measure sales managers that I'm going to drop to. And then GB, I don't know if you have links to your sheets or any templates or anything like that, but I know people are reaching out for that. So let me actually we have some scorecard templates. I'll drop those all here really quick while we're at it. And this is what other people use to we partner with a lot of different people in different industries to be like, hey, show us what you track. So if any of these names stand out to you or industries match who you are, feel free to check these out. But the data practice behind sales, I think, is important that you know how to coach and why you're tracking the different things. And so that is why you could track a million things, but you should know not only what good or bad looks like, but how to impact it. So if activity is low, People aren't hitting their daily scorecard target or whatever, dials are low. What do? You might blitz, you might share a leaderboard, you might run a quick contest or whatever around something like that. You have to know how to get it back up, right? Or if your overall like meeting held rate is down, like people are setting a lot of meetings, but our hold rate is down. It's summer, people are pushing, it's vacation, whatever. How do you impact that? What do you do? And so we have like every metric documented to like what lever you pull to impact that, whether you want it to go up or down. You kind of need to know how to manage or coach around it. And I think that that is something that a lot of sales managers don't receive from their bosses of like, okay, well, I know our quota attainment's down, like across the board. No one's hitting quota. No one's achieving quota. We're hitting our dials. Our activity is there. Does it need to be more activity? And so you need to break that down into like micro efficiency metrics to see, where are we missing? Are we missing because the meetings aren't holding? Are the meetings holding, but they're not converting? Are we missing because the dials are down, or because the dials are there, but we're not getting conversations because our info is bad from whatever data source? So tracking everything down into efficiency metrics and helping your managers know exactly what lever to pull when things are down is extremely important, in my opinion, as far as like a total data practice goes. So I know someone asked for tracking sheets. We should talk more about that. But another place, if y'all are interested in coming, we have a free sales summit coming up at Ambition. If anyone wants to come to Nashville, see me where I live. We have a lot of people who are going to be there. So I just dropped that in the chat too, in case anyone wants to register for Peak Sales Summit. Or if you're already in Nashville, bring it on.
All right, cool. I've got one thing. So I'm going to share out the link with y'all in just a second, but I wanted to walk you through some things that I created. So if you're like looking for, and I'm not saying that my templates are the best thing in the world, but they can be a good starting point. So I have like a whole thing of like, all right, SDR Manager Survival Guide, where it's like everything from, you need to present, to a interview panel, to get an SDR manager job, to like core responsibilities is what I shared as well, to like an issue diagnosis guide. So like if you're like, all right, these micro efficiencies that Mary is talking about, I just studied my reps' behavior and I got real nerdy, and I wrote down like every single thing that I saw. So like phone effectiveness is not just a matter of like, I mean, even look at the calling behavior of the reps. Like, are they making calls only in 1 hour of the day? Well, no wonder they're not able to connect to anybody. Like they're not available at that time. So where you can find like all of these resources is in this like one page. So like pacing formulas and activity metrics. This is activity metrics is something that I shared already here. How I understand like how are reps pacing in a month or in a quota, like what are the areas that we really need to focus on for activity or for conversion as well. Like it's a guide to be able to like quickly assess where do you need to focus on. And then effectiveness metrics, like it really just breaks down like, all right, now that you know where someone's pacing, you understand what's getting in the way. Like it's an encyclopedia, and also it shows the calculations of like, all right, here's the encyclopedia of all of the different efficiency metrics. And then secondly, here's how you can actually like calculate them. I think I also have like, here's how you can find them as well, depending on what your tech stack looks like and the kinds of questions you need to be asking to figure out like, how do you address this too? So I'm going to send the link to this. You can download it. It's free, by the way, but you can drop a donation if you'd like. Okay. So I will drop that link right now.
A couple questions. Stephen asked, is there a link to the templates? Are they a purchase? The links I shared are all free. You have to give an email address, but use a burner. I don't care. They're free. Any help with knowing what to set SDR quota to? Logan asked. So first of all, what is their quota is some hot topic. So our SDRs at Ambition, we measure meetings held as their ultimate target. That is what they are comped on because that is what they can control. Previously, and in other orgs, I think that it is when the meeting moves into qualified pipeline. The downside to that is, especially if you have SDRs paired to AEs, sometimes the AE feels a little pressure to help their friend get paid, and they're going to flip something to pipeline, and then we're going to say, your pipeline looks really healthy, and they're going to be like, well, it's a lot of fluff. And I'm going to be like, who converted it to pipeline? You did. So there's a little bit of contention that can be there. So sometimes we bonus or spiff the SDR on that, but in my opinion, we're the ones giving them the accounts. We're the ones giving them the titles. We are the ones giving them the parameters and who they can book meetings with. And the number one thing inside their control is getting the meeting and getting the person to show up. So it is meetings held. For how we set the number, it is what we talked about, what we call the blueprint. We know that X% of meetings held convert to pipeline. So based on the pipeline target, that is how we set our overall meetings held target. And then they have a meeting set number that they have to hit based on how many meetings usually show up, and then how many connects, and then how many calls, and it works backwards from there. And so I actually have a great template for that too that I will chat right now, because it lets you put in your specific targets into the spreadsheet. So it does the math for you. So let me share that. It's a meetings set template. Let's see right here. So you can put in your own personal metrics for like what your end goals are revenue wise, and then it'll help you walk it backwards to know how many meetings your reps need to set. It's just an Excel or Google sheet spreadsheet. So
Nice.
check that out. Curious in the chat, any other questions of something that maybe we didn't share a template to, or something you don't think there are resources on for SDR managers that you wish GB would make resources on? Because I bet she knows it in her brain. But what topic have we not talked about that y'all feel like no one is talking about for sales managers? Like, what resources do not exist? What topics do you wish you knew more about, or templates that you wish you had? Put it in the chat.
Great question. I think I was thinking about the quota question as well, and the second question too, like things that I wish existed or like more in depth is like getting alignment with sales as an SDR, BDR leader, alignment with marketing as well. Like our roles are like our function is so like cross-functional and also like dependent on marketing and sales in a really interesting way where I think it's really one of the things that I'm really big on with my team is the practice of like managing out, managing up, kind of sometimes like coaching people towards like, hey, is this the right way that we need to be looking at things? Then 100% have a influence on how quotas are set and what metrics you're looking at, but just like making sure that our teams are aligned and that we're all we all have that kind of shared vision, shared purpose, moving in the right direction.
I think that's so smart. Alignment, you can never be too aligned, honestly. Like, and I would even pull marketing into that, like your full go-to-market function, like for sure. A couple great questions in here that we can fly through. I'm going to throw this one to you, GB. What are your key metrics for a Salesforce dashboard?
So key metrics that I look at is, so whatever you're compensating BDRs on, like that to me is at the very top. And then I look at like, what are like the indicators of like, are we moving in the right direction? So for us, it's like stage one opportunity. So I actually have two dashboards. I go performance dashboards on one. So this is looking at like meetings booked, meetings held, opportunities created. And so I'll also look at like what needs to be dispositioned by an AE. So these are meetings that have held, but have not, like they haven't been close lost, or they haven't been converted into a meeting or into an opportunity. I'll also look at like anything that did not convert. What was marked as disqualified? Because sometimes like we mark things wrong. So I want to make sure that people get paid appropriately. So like that's something that I'll use just to kind of understand what's going on. I would be honest, that's more for me and my manager than it is for my reps. And then so the activity dashboard, it looks at like, all right, here's where we're tracking as a team in terms of opportunity generation. But then I'll also look at like, just what are we doing on a daily and weekly basis for meetings being booked? And then I'll look at like calls, emails, LinkedIn on a daily basis, but also look at like, where are we tracking for the week? Because we do have a lot of weekly, like I do want to make sure they're pacing for a weekly mark as well. So like, those are the two dashboards that I have.
Yeah. That's great. One question around, should a sales org decide to go intent-based model or vertical-based? I'll answer this really quickly. We still have an ICP, which encompasses certain verticals, but we leverage intent inside of that, and that is how we route accounts. So a great industry for us is other software people who sell software, people at sports team. We ticket sellers, logistics. We have some key verticals, and then when an account inside those ICP criteria shows intent, that is when it gets assigned to an SDR. Marketing is responsible for getting those to show intent. So we are leveraging digital ads, email marketing, et cetera, trying to get those accounts to show intent. As soon as they do, they round robin over. Another great question was around cadence creation and messaging. So I think we could both answer this because I think everyone does it differently. So someone asked, who is responsible for creating that at your companies? Ours is a shared partnership between marketing and the sales development org. So marketing will pass something over that is in alignment with the campaigns that they're running pre-awareness, because we do use an intent-based model. So we're saying for people who we have targeted and they looked at sales coaching. So we are a sales coaching software. If they've looked at a certain part of coaching, this is what we've said. This is the email nurture they're getting. This is our proposed cadence for you. Sales development then takes it and edits it, personalizes it, tailors it from there. But we just give something to react to. I'll be honest, I don't think we do a great job of like total streamlined adoption of that just yet. We kind of let everyone do what works for them because we just measure the metrics. KD, who GB mentioned earlier, he did have a great sales contest. I think he called it like the Shakespeare Award to see who had the highest open rate. And then you can deploy that across the team. So like shared best practice is great. Curious who writes the cadences at your org, GB?
Well, it's not. Okay, so I think the best thing that I've ever seen happen is we actually had, was at a previous organization, we had a BDR who was really great at email performance, and they actually moved into a role where they owned all cadences. So I actually think that like having like a centralized person who's like aware of like sales messaging and effectiveness, like if one person owns it and then they report that out and like, get feedback from everyone, like that to me is probably the best thing that I've ever seen thus far. Otherwise, I mean, unless like if you don't have a really tight alignment between marketing and sales development, I think it's hard for marketing to provide that content to sales and sales development and for them to buy in. So yeah, I think like just having a centralized person, or I actually like the idea of having like sales leaders and sales leadership like actually approve the messaging and then send that down. Because one of the things that I end up seeing afterwards is people like are criticizing the SDRs. I'm like, if you just come up with the messaging and we tweak it, it's great.
Yeah. I know we're at time and people had more questions we couldn't answer. So GB, will you drop your LinkedIn in the chat? I just dropped mine. This is where you can find me, Mary Foster on LinkedIn. GB, she is also on LinkedIn. So definitely reach out there and we will have Savannah close us out.
Yeah. Thanks, GB and Mary, for bringing all this incredible insight and sharing all of your resources with the community. Thanks to everybody that's joined. We look forward to seeing you at our events next week. Before we jump, one more thing for everybody. The Sales Hacker team is running a confidential survey on the state of sales tech stack. I'll drop a link to that in the chat here. It takes less than 15 minutes, and you can tell us what you really think. The completed surveys are eligible for a $500 gift card winning. So you'll just have to enter your email if you want to enter that drawing. The winner will be announced on October 10th. So make sure you fill out the survey before then. But other than that, it was a great discussion today. I'm so glad you all could join us. And I really look forward to next time. Thanks, everybody.